exma for bringing all of us together to share some ideas and learn from each other. I also mostly want to thank all of you for giving me a great opportunity to come back to Bogota, which truly is one of my favorite cities. We also have an expression in the United States, I imagine you have it here, which is to let your ideas take flight. And I just want to say, I have never seen a more accurate representation of ideas taking flight than I saw earlier this morning. So thank you for that as well. But I think this morning what I want to start with, before we talk about ideas, is another one of my favorite cities, which is Dallas, Texas. Now you probably don't hear many people admit that their favorite city is Dallas, Texas. But there's a very specific reason, and I'm going to show it to you. We're going to, there we go. This is the Renaissance Tower. It's in Dallas, Texas. For many years, the Renaissance Tower was the tallest building in Dallas, but that's not why I like it so much. The fact is that the Renaissance Tower, for many, many years, was the headquarters of the Blockbuster company. And a meeting took place here in the year 2000 that ended up having a very, very big influence on me, on Netflix, and I think on what became of the video industry. Now, in the year 2000, we had started Netflix, but Netflix was less than 3 years old. We were pretty small. We were on track to perhaps do $3 million in revenue. Maybe we had 100 employees. But unfortunately, that year, we were on track to lose nearly $50 million. Now, if any of you can remember the business climate in the year 2000, that was not a good year to lose $50 million. So, being prudent entrepreneurs, we decided to seek strategic alternatives, which is code for how do we get out of this. Now, the obvious person for us to approach was the Blockbuster Corporation. But in the year 2000, they were in a very different place. They were on track to do nearly $6 billion in revenue. They had 9,000 stores. They had 60,000 employees. We were nothing to them. And so, of course, we tried to call or email just to get an appointment to talk with them. We heard nothing for months. Until finally, one day in the fall of the year 2000, we were at a corporate retreat, and it was in the mountains outside of a little city called Santa Barbara. And as you can imagine, in Silicon Valley, we're pretty casual. So when we go on these retreats, we're even more casual. I think all that I had brought with me was shorts, some sandals, maybe I had 2 t-shirts. That was my outfit. My partner, Reed Hastings, he had a Hawaiian shirt. That was his dress up. And that was precisely the time that Blockbuster calls us and says, "We'd like to see you tomorrow morning." So of course, we have to get ourselves from Santa Barbara out to Dallas, Texas, and do it pretty much on the spot. So for the first time ever, we actually leased a private jet to fly there. So we fly to Dallas, and they usher us up to the 36th floor of this building, and into a conference room, which seems like it was the size of this room. And I'm there in my shorts and my sandals, my t-shirt. Reed has his Hawaiian shirt on. And then the Blockbuster guys come in, and they've got their 3-piece suits and their $1,000 shoes. And we sit around the conference table, and we explain what it is we want to try and do. Our idea is that we will run the online business for Blockbuster. They run the stores, find all kinds of synergies. It's not perfect. And they nodded their heads and said, "Well, that sounds, maybe it's promising. How much do you think we should buy you for?" And Reed got his courage up and said, $50 million? You know what they did? They laughed at us. And the meeting went downhill very quickly from that point. And the ride in the plane back to Santa Barbara was very quiet. And all I could remember doing, sitting to myself on the plane, saying, now we're going to have to kick their ass. And you know, it took us 15 years, but we finally did. Blockbuster went into bankruptcy, and Netflix became the dominant video rental company. Now, I'm telling you this story for several reasons. On one hand, it's an inspiring story, how with nothing more than some good ideas, a group of people with no experience whatsoever in the video business can take down a $6 billion company with 60,000 employees. Inspiring. But what if you are the $6 billion company? In that case, it becomes a little frightening, because it really says the person who's going to come after you may look nothing like you. They may not even exist right now. And it says the lesson there is if you cannot learn to innovate, and innovate quickly, that if you can't learn to disrupt yourself, you're leaving it wide open for someone to disrupt you for you. Now, Netflix, of course, was a disruptive force, but Netflix was actually my 7th startup. And since leaving Netflix more than 10 years ago, I've had a chance to work with dozens of other early-stage companies and hundreds of young entrepreneurs. I've invested in scores more companies. And from all of my own companies, all the ones that I've helped, all the ones that I've invested in, I've learned something very, very important. Not just the skills and the techniques, but I'm going to share with you what I think is the most important thing. And if you take away from today nothing else, I want you to take away this. That anyone can do this. That anywhere can do it. That any company can do it. You do not need to be in Silicon Valley. I travel all over the world talking to early stage, innovative companies. I find fantastic ideas coming out of places all over the world. I was in Guadalajara, Mexico. I was in Seoul, South Korea. I was in San Luis, Argentina. I'm in little towns in the United States, little spots in Europe. There's amazing ideas bubbling up all over the world. I find them here. Bogota. You do not need special training. You do not need a business degree. You do not need a computer science degree. Sure, one of the entrepreneurs I work with has a double PhD in math and computer science. But one of my favorite entrepreneurs dropped out of college, drove an ambulance in Los Angeles, fought forest fires in the mountains of Montana, and then started his company. Another one is only 17 years old. Another played in a ska band before he started Music Streaming Company. You do not need to be the best and the brightest. I found that some of the most innovative thinking doesn't come from the A students. It comes from the B and the C students. I think part of it is that education tends to squeeze all the risk out of people. So sometimes the most risk-tolerant people are not the very best students. They're all the rest of us. So, what do you need? I think you only need 2 things. First, I think most important, you need a tolerance for risk. Risk-taking is fundamental to ideas and innovation. But I don't mean scary, dangerous risk, perhaps as I've expressed in the photo. I mean the type of risk that says, I'm going to go someplace without knowing where it leads. I mentioned that I was in San Luis, Argentina not too long ago, and from my hotel, there were some mountains that were rising up outside of town, and I could see a little trail kind of leading up the hills, and I decided I'm going to go for a run, and off I go up the trail. And then I find a fork, and the next trail is smaller, so now I'm running on this even smaller trail. Then I think, off in the distance, I think I see where another little trail goes, but I can't quite see where it leads. It might go around that corner, but I can't tell. The risk-taking is saying, let's give it a shot. The only way to find out where it leads is to take that trail. And of course, that was not a trail, but it turned into this 4-hour epic, climbing over fences, sneaking through fields. But that was so much more exciting than if I had stayed on the road. We also are going to need ideas. And in fact, as I'll explain later, you're going to need a lot of ideas. But I want to point out that these do not have to be big ideas. But Mark Zuckerberg just wanted to meet girls when he came up with the idea for Facebook. Now when Reed and I came up with the idea that became Netflix, we just wanted to make video rental a little bit easier. And my son, actually in the audience somewhere here, started his first company when he was 8 years old. When he realized the candy bar that he could buy for 10 cents at the grocery store could be sold the next day at the schoolyard for $1. Candy arbitrage. It doesn't need to be a new idea. People have been selling books since they originated the printing press. But there was still room for Jeff Bezos to come up with the idea for Amazon. They've been renting cars since they've been in the wheel. But we've seen tremendous innovation in transportation. Companies like Uber and Lyft, relay rides, and Get Around, and self-driving car. It does not need to be a complex idea. The Post-it note is a piece of paper. This little piece of paper comes in more than 50 colors, 37 sizes, 17 fragrances. They sell more than $1 billion a year for a piece of paper. In fact, I'm going to argue it doesn't even need to be a good idea. So when I told my wife the idea for what became Netflix, she thought it was the stupidest thing she had ever heard. But we've all had that experience, haven't we? We have some great idea, and you come rushing out and you tell your boss, or you tell your coworkers, or you tell your spouse, or your teacher. And what do they say? That'll never work. And then they're helpful, and they tell you all the reasons it's such a bad idea. But why is it so hard to tell a good idea from a bad idea? What is a good idea? So to help answer that question, I want to introduce you to someone, and his name is William Goldman. Now, if you don't recognize William Goldman, I'm not surprised. William Goldman is a Hollywood person, he's a Hollywood writer. And if you don't recognize his name, maybe you recognize his work. Hopefully, as people here are familiar with the film in English called The Princess Bride. But for people of my generation, he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, wrote All the President's Men, wrote Marathon Man, Magic, Misery, Heat, won 2 Academy Awards for screenwriting. But ironically, for such a famous writer, William Goldman is famous for writing just 3 words. And what William Goldman wrote was this: nobody knows anything. Nobody knows anything. Now, he was referring to Hollywood, and he was referring to the fact that people have no idea how well a movie is going to do until after it's been released. You can have A-list actors, the best director, a fantastic script, and end up with a complete bomb. But you could have a movie with complete unknowns, first-time director, first-time actors, and end up with a movie like maybe Blair Witch Project, which I think cost $35,000 to make, has since grossed more than $250 million. Nobody knows anything. True in Hollywood, but I think true any place people are trying new ideas. I mentioned that I've been involved with starting 7 companies. Some of them clearly very successful, others not so much. But I'm completely sincere that when we started each of them, I had the slightest idea which would be successful and which wouldn't. Neither did anybody else, because nobody knows anything. I mentioned that I did some angel investing. So I'm very well aware of that rule of thumb that says for every 10 investments I make, I lose all my money on 7, maybe break even on 2, and hopefully one of them is a big enough hit that pays off the others. But why can't I know in advance? Because nobody knows anything. The reason I'm continuing to hammer home nobody knows anything is because when you come up with ideas, you're trying ideas, you're thinking of ideas, you've got to realize no one can know if it's a good idea or a bad idea until after they've seen it. So when you're in that position, there's only one thing to do. You have to take that risk and do something. You've got to build something, make something, try something. You learn more in 1 hour doing it than you will in a month of talking about it. In a year of doing business plans and PowerPoint presentations. You've got to take your ideas and as quickly as possible, make them collide with the real world. But to do that, you've got to start with an idea. Now, we're all in the business of ideas. That's what marketing really is. But how do you come up with more ideas? How do you come up with ideas which have better potential? So, where do ideas come from? So, Silicon Valley, when we're coming up with business ideas in the tech sector, we use some tricks. One thing we do is look at new technologies. We look at mobile, internet. My last startup is in big data, and say, are there openings here? Are there new ideas there? Look at current trends, healthcare, education, climate change. We look at new business models and say, can we apply these new business models to old problems? But far and away, the easiest way to find ideas is simply this. You just have to look for pain. You have to ask yourself, what's wrong? You've got to train yourself to see the world as an imperfect place. Because as soon as you see all those problems, all of a sudden, solutions come springing into your head. But you've got to pick problems that you're familiar with. You've got to pick things that you know well. So don't try and solve the problem of malaria. Start with something close to you. Job, social life, hobbies. So just to give you an example of how easy it could be to come up with ideas, I'm going to talk about something that I had, a job I had when I was in the university. In the university, I painted houses. Now, this was a long time ago, really 35 years ago. And that was a very different time. There was no streaming video, there was no internet, there was no Wi-Fi, there was no cell phones, there wasn't even video rental, barely had remote control for the television. Back then, when you had to buy paint, and you went to the hardware store, the paint came in a container that looked like this one. I know, it's shocking. Now, imagine my surprise when this last summer, when I was painting my daughter's bedroom, and I went to the hardware store to buy paint. Now, we live in a very different world. We do have the internet, we do have Wi-Fi, we do have cell phones, we wear computers on our wrists, we have self-driving cars. And so, imagine how surprised I was to go to the store to buy paint and find that paint is now sold in a container that looks like this. No change. 35 years. Now, is that because this is the perfect container for paint? Well, I hope not. It's pretty bad. And those of you who've painted something certainly know what I mean. So let's start. When you want to paint something, the first thing you have to do is get the lid off. Now, it sort of makes sense that when you want to paint, you need a tool to open the lid. You need a screwdriver. Okay, fine. I get a screwdriver and I pry off the lid. And now I have a lid covered with paint, which I put off to the side and try very hard not to step in it. Now I have to stir the paint. And luckily, they've developed a very specialized tool for stirring paint. And it's called a stick. See one up there. Now I take this stick and I stir my paint. And it works pretty well, but now I've got a stick covered with paint. And I've got to get the paint off the stick. There's also a technique for that, where you take the stick and put it back in the paint. Pull it out slowly, but now it's dry on one side, and there's still paint on the top, so you turn it over and put it back in the paint. Pull it out, and now the other side's wet, and it's dry. You have to do that 5 or 6 times. Then I put this to the side, and again, try not to step in it. Now, we go to pour the paint, and you can see that the can has an easy pour spout. So, of course, when you try and pour the paint into your tray, 2 things happen. One is when you stop, paint flows down over the side of the can, where if you're not very careful, it gets all over the floor, or your clothes, your hands. And the paint fills in this little rim around the can. More on that later. I will not go into the agony of actually painting, where you have to tape everything and put down paper and drop cloths and then scrape windows. It's a nightmare. And cleaning up is even worse. But I will point out something that when it comes time to finish, pour your paint back into the can, and to close the pan, put the lid back on. And it makes sense that if you needed a screwdriver to open it, what do you need to close it? Hammer. So you hammer down the lid a few times, and what happens? We've forgotten about all that paint inside the rim, and it sprays all over the room and makes a big mess. Now, I'm not trying to tell you how bad it is to paint. What I'm hoping happened is that I described my difficulties painting, that something was happening in your minds. And you were thinking, well, why don't they make paint come in the containers that milk comes in? Or that even better laundry detergent, where when you put the cap back on, it all flows back into the can. Or why isn't there a lid you could buy separately with a pour spout on it? Or why don't they? Or why can't we? Why isn't there? That's where ideas come from. Take something you face every day and begin to realize that it's imperfect, that there are ways to solve these things. Because you see, contrary to popular belief, ideas do not spring out of thin air in some kind of eureka moment. You have to be looking for them. The idea for Netflix, for example, did not come from some one moment of pain over renting a video. We were looking for that idea, and it was buried in a big pile of bad ideas. And we didn't even find it at a video store. We found the idea for Netflix while we were carpooling. Now, this story actually goes back even further, really 20 years ago, when I was working at a small software startup. There was only 9 of us, and things were going very well. And we were able to sell our little company to a much bigger software company. And that was a great thing. Our investors made some money, we made some money, we all went to work for the big company. Now, this company was founded by a gentleman named Hastings. So I went to work with Reed. 6 months later, this company was sold to an even bigger software company. And that was also a good thing. Investors made some money, we all made a little bit of money, but the best thing of all is that I got fired. But I got fired in that great way. And they said, Mark, we're really not going to need you anymore in these new combined companies, but not so fast. We need you to stick around for maybe 6 months. We won't have anything to do. We just need to have you here in case we have questions. So I said, I get to get paid. I get to come to my office with my phone and my internet connection and my whiteboard and my conference table for 6 months, and I don't need to do anything? He said, that's right. And I said, well, sign me up for that. And I decided I was going to use that time to start my next company. Now, Reed, he was in a similar situation. He was also losing his job when the companies combined, but he decided he wanted to do something else. He was going to become an educational philanthropist. And he still, though, wanted to keep his hand in this whole startup world. So Reed and I said, let's come up with an idea together. And Reed will fund it. I'll start it. He'll get to be involved when he wants, and we're all happy. So then it came time to find an idea. And the way that worked for us was this. Reed and I both lived in a little town called Santa Cruz, California. And every morning, Reed would drive to my house, pick me up, and I'd get in his car, and we'd drive over the mountains to our office in Sunnyvale. And on that ride, which took about an hour, we'd talk about ideas. We'd talk about new technologies, about new trends, about different business models. And of course, we'd talk about looking for pain. And then when I got to the office, I'd go in to my whiteboard and my internet connection and my phone and my conference table, and I'd research these ideas. And at the end of the day, we'd get back into my car, get Reed's car, and drive back over the mountains to Santa Cruz. During that drive, I would tell him everything I had learned. Now, we went through probably 100, 125 different ideas over those 2 or 3 months. Some okay, some not so good. We learned something important. And we learned this, that the half-life of an idea is 24 hours. Now, for those of you who are asleep in your physics class, what I mean by the half-life of an idea being 24 hours is that if you start off on Monday morning and you have 16 bright, shiny ideas, all full of promise, and just 24 hours later, probably half of them have been shown to not be very good. You found the problems, you found a cost issue, someone's already doing it. By Wednesday, you're down to 4. By Thursday, maybe you've only got 2 left. And if you're lucky, on Friday, just one of those original ideas still holds some promise. Now, I should point out that the idea to rent videos on a website was one of our very first ideas. But I researched it, and it seemed to be a bad idea. And the reason is that back then, this is in 1996, the only way to video was on VHS cassettes. Hopefully you remember those. And when I researched mailing them back and forth, that was not going to work. So that idea went away. Until a few months later, Reed heard about a new technology called the DVD. Small, light. We said to ourselves, I wonder if we could find a new way to ship these. And we turned the car around, we drove back to Santa Cruz, went to a record store, and bought a used music CD. Went next door, bought a little envelope, a gift envelope. Took the CD, put it in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz, put a stamp on it, walked up the steps of the Santa Cruz post office and dropped it in the slot, and then drove to work. Next morning, less than 24 hours later, Reed came to pick me up. He didn't have to say anything. He just held up the envelope, unbroken CD, that had gotten to his house in less than 1 day. That was the moment we said, this idea just might work. And then we changed. Then we went from trying to find ideas to validating an idea. I researched as much as I could. How many DVD players are there out there? How many DVDs are there? How much do they cost? How long will it take us to build a website? How many people? How much can we charge for this? And I researched and researched and researched, but no matter how much I did, there was no way to know for sure this was going to work. Certainly no one had done DVDs by mail before. And we got to the point that every person with an idea has, where you just can't learn anymore. You have to make this decision to step forward and just do it, even if you don't know what's going to happen. You have to base your decision on incomplete, inconclusive, or even worse, contradictory information. And when you get to that point, it happens so frequently that we do have the term for it, and we do say, just do it. And we did. Reed wrote a check. Got a small office in Scotts Valley, California. We hired 9 or 10 people. We spent 6 months building a website, which probably people in this room could build in a few hours. And on April 14th, 1997, we launched Netflix. Now, the Netflix then bears very little resemblance to the Netflix you know here in Columbia. To start, it's DVD only. There's no streaming. If you want a movie, we mail it to you. There's due dates and late fees. Gotta send it back or we charge you. And even more interestingly enough, we didn't only rent DVDs, we sold DVDs. In fact, we sold a lot of DVDs. By the end of that first summer in business, 99% of our revenue came from selling DVDs. So the good news was, we were probably going to have a $1 million a year. That was actually very bad news, because we knew that since it was all selling DVDs, it was just a matter of time before Amazon sold DVDs, and Walmart and other big stores sold DVDs. Then margins went to zero. Slowly but surely, we're out of business.